Hello and welcome. I am Tori Couch, a writer with KillerFrogs.com. And joining me today, we have Brandon Brown from Wolverine Digest, Michigan's fan nation for SI. How are you doing today, Brandon?
I'm good. This game's getting closer and closer. It's getting cold out. You were just talking about that. Christmas is around the corner. Yeah, ready to go.
Yeah, no, I'm excited about this Fiesta Bowl matchup between TCU and Michigan. I mean, it's college football playoff semifinal game. There's a lot on the line, and from a TCU perspective, it's the first time they've made the CFP, coming off arguably one of the best seasons in program history, versus a Michigan team who's at least been to the playoffs. And in a way, it's not been there, done that, because the game against Georgia last year may not have gone the way y'all had hoped, but you're a little more familiar with that experience.
Yeah, I mean, this team, it's so new. Like, there's so many. It's funny that you say that, because yes, they were just there last year. They certainly got handled pretty well by Georgia. They kind of took it on the chin a little bit. And so you can kind of say, like, well, they were just there. They kind of get it. They know it. But it's like, it's a new starting quarterback. It's so many new guys on defense. It's a new defensive and offensive coordinator. I mean, there's a lot of new people around the building that weren't there last year. Or if they were there, they were in a very different role. I mean, a couple coaches have moved around a little bit. So it's interesting, because it does feel like, okay, they were just here last year. Cool. They know what it's about. But some of the guys don't. A lot of the guys don't. They just weren't as big of a part of the team, or in terms of snap count, or again, starting quarterback, guys calling the plays. So it's got a little bit of both sides of the coin to it. But yeah, I mean, for me, I love the fact that I'm going back again. Me and my coworker were getting ready for another playoff game. Yep. Like, it's incredible. Yeah, so I'm really looking forward to the trip out there and just all the stuff that comes with the week of activities, and then of course the game itself. Yeah, it's going to be awesome.
Absolutely, yeah, and it's in Glendale, where the Arizona Cardinals play. So it's going to be a fun game too for, I think, the players. Just a little bit different experience than they might otherwise get too, from that perspective.
Yeah, I mean, there's the same thing last year, playing in an NFL stadium, an NFL city. There's stuff all week long for the players to do, and kind of just enjoy that whole experience. They get a bunch of stuff. They get treated like celebrity. They probably get that anyway. I mean, most of the big time college players are kind of used to that deal. But no, it's going to be fun. I mean, like I said, last year we were down in Miami. Stephen Ross, a Michigan alum, owns the Dolphins. So there was kind of like this Michigan vibe. It was on New Year's Eve. So even though Michigan got beat up pretty good in the game, there was like a New Year's Eve party down on the field afterwards with like all these Michigan folks. So probably won't have that vibe this year, but I'm still looking forward to it. I'm like, for TCU people, like, is this like a dream come true this year? I mean, the undefeated run until the very, very end, but now kind of a chance for redemption, and that this whole stage and everything's got to be amazing.
It is, yeah. And I think in a little bit, kind of like you said, it's almost like a dream scenario. Because going to, at least my expectations, I think for a lot of people going into this season, it was 6-6, 7-5. Let's get to the bowl game. Let's make some strides. Let's show improvement under a new head coach in Sonny Dykes and all these new coaches and new strength coach. Nobody predicted 12-0. I don't really think anyone, there maybe were a few, but nobody really predicted us to be in the Big 12 championship game. So going from all these sub 500, right around 500 seasons, to going 12-0 in the regular season, I think a lot of people, including myself, are still trying to process what happened this year.
So that was us last year. Last year was like, wow, Michigan, maybe all these changes and the quarterback battle and what's going to happen. And Jim Harbaugh was like coming off this terrible 2020 season. I know COVID year was weird for everybody, but they were bad on the field, and his contract was slashed, and he had to hire a bunch of new guys. And last year was the magical run. This year's better, but like, it was expected on some levels. Like, Michigan was favored. Everybody knew Michigan's going to be favored in the first 11. They won't be favored in Columbus against Ohio State, but they're going to have a shot because of how they played them last year and the formula and everything. And this year was even more impressive, in enemy territory. So I kind of feel like TCU is doing what we all did last year. We were like, oh my God, this is a dream come true. Like, how did this happen? And we went down there and kind of ran into a buzzsaw called Georgia. And I don't know. Is Michigan a buzzsaw for I mean, the spread's not crazy, but like, most people are picking Michigan to win this one.
And I can see why it's not a fantastic or ideal matchup for
Matchup,
TCU.
yeah.
Now, I would say I'd prefer Michigan over Georgia. No doubt about that. But Michigan, their identity for years has been, let's pound the ball, let's wear teams out, let's win the line of scrimmage on both sides. And that's not necessarily TCU's MO. And so now, that being said, TCU can scheme around that a little bit, try and do some, their big thing is that pass game. Let's get Johnson downfield on go routes. That was the second play against Kansas State in the Big 12 title game, was a 50-yard go route. And it worked. Got him downfield, got him a touchdown eventually. So you can kind of scheme around some of that stuff, but it's not the best matchup for TCU. I don't think so. I see why people are betting for Michigan, and the line is what it is. I see why it's that way.
Yeah, I mean, Michigan all year, they just lean on teams and lean and lean and lean. And it's like, pretty close. Almost every Big Ten game was close at halftime. And then you look up at the end of the game and they won by 20 or 30. It's like, it was that way like every week. It's the first year in program history that Michigan beat Michigan State, Penn State, and Ohio State all by 20 or more points. Like, they dominated their three main rivals in the Big Ten East, and they've just done it all year. And I know, TCU plays a little different brand of football. I think their base is a 3-3-5. I know a lot of people are like, how are they going to stop Michigan? Michigan wants to run the ball 50 times a game. Blake Corum out is a little bit of a change of pace, but didn't hurt him against Ohio State, didn't hurt him against Purdue. And so Donovan Edwards stepping into that role. And so I'm just anxious to see it. It's not a matchup. A lot about the other team really coming in. You've got to do your homework a little bit. And I forget, have they ever played before? Is this the first matchup? I feel like I remember reading that this is the first time they've ever played.
It very well might be. I'm not 100% sure, but I mean, if they played against each other, it was back in the 30s, 40s when college football looked so different than it does now.
Well,
so
not a whole lot different from what Michigan's doing, I guess. But yeah.
But yeah, so I mean, at least in modern days, they've not faced each other. So like you said, it's two teams that are just not familiar with each other, and they don't really play teams on their schedules that are similar. There's certain obviously aspects, but overall these are two very different teams. And kind of diving into some of those matchups, Michigan, you mentioned Corum is out, suffered a season-ending injury, so now you're looking at Donovan Edwards. From what I can tell, Michigan hasn't really lost a beat. They've just found the next running back who's going to come in and get behind that line and gain those chunk yards and open things up for JJ McCarthy down the field. And so I think that's, for me, talk a little about him and his development over the season, because it definitely looks like he has gotten more comfortable as the season has gone on.
Yeah, I mean, he's the big, he was the big 5-star kid. Everybody was just waiting for him to get his shot. He's a very athletic guy. He can run. They don't run him a lot, but he can run. He's fast. Just haven't used him that way. He's not the biggest guy, so they don't want him taking a bunch of hits. I'll tell you what, I don't want him running around out there like Max Duggan. I'll put it that way. That dude is a warrior, and he's put together, and he takes shots, and he just keeps coming and coming. And JJ's real tough. He's got that same kind of mentality, but he's about $190. It's a little different animal, and he's only a sophomore, and he's this first year starting. So I mean, like, there's some similarities in how those two guys are wired, I think, but built differently, different skill set. But they do some similar stuff too. But yeah, to your point, I mean, it's JJ McCarthy he started 12 games. Like, that's it. He's still a young player, and they haven't asked him to do a ton. So when he was recruited and he came to Michigan, and last year we watched Cade McNamara hand the ball off a lot, not throw it very much. Everyone says, well, when JJ wins that job, like, he's going to shatter the Michigan touchdown passing record. And he didn't. It was like the same thing. Throw it a little bit, be efficient, move the ball, don't turn it over, and run, lean on Blake Corum, lean on Donovan Edwards. The offensive line just won the Joe Moore Award for the second year in a row.
Yes.
First time ever. So, like, that's what they do. That's their identity. So, yeah, it's a bummer that Blake Corum couldn't finish out the year because he was having such a phenomenal season. But JJ McCarthy all year long, efficient, not a lot of turnovers, timely plays. Against Illinois, he had to make a couple fourth down conversions down the stretch. He kind of grew up during that game. And then the Ohio State performance on the road was, I mean, he's a Michigan legend now for that game and for this season. And he's just a pup still. So, It's
Right.
been fun to watch, and you just wonder what it's going to look like because he's got all the arm talent in the world. If you need him to spin it 50 times, he can. They just haven't asked him to do it, and he hasn't had to do it. They've won every game, and they've run the ball well every game. And then when you need him to make a play, he usually does. So it's been fun to watch his development. But there's still like a faction of the fan base, myself included, who's like, let him throw it 50 times. I just want to see what it looks like. And probably not the time to experiment with it now. But
No.
everybody feels like he could do that if he had to.
Well, yeah, and I think, yeah, it's a really good point. That, and I remember that when he was being talked about, especially as the season started, and it was the whole debate about starting him, and then okay, and that whole situation at the start of the season, and everyone was like, we just want to see him throw. We want to see what he can do. And like you said, you haven't really gotten to see him get released. And I don't think you switch identities going into a semifinal game where you're hoping to get to the national championship.
Yeah.
But I think one thing you touched on is he's a pup. He's a freshman. He's gotten some good game experience, but he doesn't have some of that callous stuff, if you will, that someone like a Max Duggan has. And I think that's something I'm interested to watch, especially early on as these teams are trying to establish what they do. Is Max Duggan's leadership and just his experience and being a senior and all these things, is that going to kind of help maybe TCU make some plays that they might not have been able to make? Or is that not going to matter because of what, Michigan just wears you down?
Yeah.
But I think there's something to be said for Duggan's experience, and just for the fact that, like you say, he's just a warrior. That run he had against Kansas State to take down the field, I calculated the yardage on it. He went 95 yards down the field of a penalty, and it backed him up, all this stuff, and then falling into the end zone and like doesn't want anybody touching him. Like, that's the type of guy you want leading your team.
No
That's
doubt.
the type of guy you want when you're like, we're going to play for a national title. That is the guy you want.
Okay, saying all that, why the hell didn't he get a call? What's going on there? What is that? So, okay, full disclosure, that was my first time watching TCU all year. Like I do, when you cover a team, it's hard to watch other teams. Like, you catch bits and pieces here and there, but I didn't watch TCU at any length. So the Big 12 championship was my first time really watching like a start to finish game. And I loved what I saw from the guy. I mean, I remember when he was a recruit, and I remember seeing a Sports Center play here and there, and he's making these plays, and he's kind of a gunslinger and a gamer. And I liked that about him. And then I watched that game, and I'm like, this dude's the real deal. And then they don't use him at the most pivotal moment. And I'm like, what is this about? What happened down there?
I don't know. And that, to me, I think, as a TCU fan, but also as someone who follows college football, that to me was the most puzzling part of that game. I think was, you have the best player on offense who just took you down the field. He had a chance, a little bit of time to recover, not a ton, but a little bit of time. Why do you not at least try once with him? Kendry Mill is a great back. He can push through lines. He's got a lot of strength and speed. But Duggan, I think, just has that little extra something in there. And so I don't know. I was surprised.
And it's so much a part of what they do. It just like, I mean, they're good at it. He's the ball handling he's really good with, making the right read. That's so hard to defend down there. And I just remember watching it thinking like, what are they doing? Sonny.
And I don't know if that was a Garrett Riley call, Sonny overrode it, or Garrett called it and Sonny just said, okay, let's run with it. I don't know how that all went down, but I was very surprised Max didn't get a shot, because you kind of feel like you said, he's so good in those types of situations. And I was surprised, because at least if you kind of do that, maybe you give yourself a bootleg on one of them. Just, you give yourself more options. If he has the ball.
So is he like he's got to be like a god to the TCU fan base, right? I mean, like, I'm seeing it develop with JJ. Most years, like, the backup quarterback is the most popular guy. Everybody's like, oh, that happens a lot at Michigan. It's probably the same thing everywhere. But Duggan's been the guy for a while now. He's got to be like, just beloved by everybody. It feels like that anyway.
He is now.
Okay.
So
all right.
Let's back up to, let's say, spring camp.
Even this year.
So let's back up all the way to spring camp. So yes, he was our starter in 19, 20, and 21. 3-year starter, team wasn't great around him. He had his own struggles too.
Hmm.
And then Chandler Morris comes in from Oklahoma, and he don't believe he played in 20 when he was at Oklahoma, but 21 was his first year at TCU. Morris got, or excuse me, Duggan got hurt, so Morris comes in and plays against Baylor and has just the game of his life. And people start kind of debating, should it be Morris, should it be Chandler? We've got a new system. And I mean, as kind of now everybody knows, Morris won the starting job. And I think a lot of people at that point were like, that's cool. Duggan kind of has opportunity. But then you have a lot of people who are saying, well, Duggan didn't have a line. He didn't have a good offense. We don't really know what he can do. So you kind of had two almost competing camps of, well, Duggan's had his chance. Morris won the job. He clearly fits what Riley wants to do better. Let's roll with it. And the people were like, well, Duggan would be good too if he had a line, because that was our big problem last year, was our offensive line just got injured left and right. And I mean, to be honest, I was on let's see what Morris can do. Duggan's kind of had his chance. I'm not, I wasn't overly impressed with stuff. Let's go with Morris. And then of course Morris gets injured. So I think for people like me, Duggan has grown on me. I still have some areas where I'm not fully convinced that he's like the best or whatever, but his heart and his ability to make those adjustments has kind of made me go, okay, like, yeah, Duggan is a good quarterback. I can live with him being my quarterback. But yes, he has kind of developed into God, and then his Heisman run and all this stuff. I think he's just garnered a lot of support with what he's done this season. But yeah, it was interesting. Even all the way back in the spring, it was almost like you had two sides, people arguing who should be the quarterback.
Well, I know about that well, because Cade McNamara starts week 1, JJ starts week 2. It's like you see what Cade did last year. And it wasn't like it was what Michigan did with Cade in there. And I think everybody thought like with JJ in there, it could go to a new level. And I guess technically it did. They didn't lose, and they're back in the playoff. But his numbers are almost identical to Cade McNamara's, which is so crazy when you think about the kind of player they are and what everybody thought JJ would do. But see, this is why this is so good. I didn't even know like that little backstory about Max Duggan, that he was like almost way out essentially. I didn't know that at all.
And from what I gather is he wasn't going to transfer. I think he was going to stick it out. But even still, that's hard when you've been the starter for 3 years and you get beat out. And so I think there's a lot of kind of like, okay, Morris got injured, whatever, but Morris beat out a guy who just came up second in the Heisman and had this type of like, so what can he do? Or does that mean he can do more? So there's just a lot of that there's just a lot of wondering now.
And Duggan declared for the NFL, correct? So this is it. This is the last hurrah for him. So, well, that's that's
games left,
right? Yeah, so that's pretty interesting. Yeah, I just find myself looking at this game, and by the way, officially they have never played before, so this is matchup number 1 between Michigan and TCU. Yeah, it is. I mean, both pretty old, obviously old time programs, but I just don't know. I don't know a lot about TCU. I mean, for Michigan fans who are probably in the same boat as me, what's scary about TCU?
Yeah, so when I was looking at TCU, kind of compared to Michigan, what I could get off numbers and awards and things like that. So the numbers aren't too far off. We're number 25 pass rush, number 25 passing in the nation. A little bit better than you guys on the pass, a little bit under you guys on rushing, but we're more explosive. That, at least on offense, TCU is an explosive offense. At one point this season, they were leading the nation in plays of 20 plus yards. I don't know if they're still number 1 at this point, but they're one of the most explosive teams in the country. So I think that's something where they could gain a bit of an advantage. Kind of like I talked about earlier is, all right, let's send Quentin Johnson on the field on go route. Let's see if the receivers can stay with him. Because I think that has kind of been an issue for some teams, is just keeping up with that speed. Johnston, Darius Davis, Tate Barber, there's a lot of speed in that receiving room. And then just the scheming that Garrett Riley does as an offensive coordinator. Every game you watch, these guys are 5 yards open, or, they're open and here's a guy flying in as the ball gets there type of thing. And the whole time you're watching like, well, somebody has to do something so they're not that wide open. And really, you'd see it at times, but it wasn't consistent. So I think that's the other big thing too, is Garrett Riley is really good at scheming guys open. And so those windows are a little bit bigger. Now, that being said, I remember watching the Iowa State game, and Max threw it into some really, really tight, tightrope thin windows. So we can make those throws. But I think it's the explosiveness of TCU's offense that can make them extremely dangerous. And then looking at like special teams kind of idea of scoring and stuff, Darius Davis, he's been the special teams player of the week and all these types of things. And he ran a punt back against Colorado. And so I think special teams could maybe be an area too where TCU could maybe get a little boost. Like if, Michigan's pulled some momentum, maybe TCU can get a big punt return or something like that. Not to say they run one back, but just get that good field position. So I think from an offensive standpoint, it's just that explosiveness that they're able to have.
I'm interested. I'm intrigued. I'm interested. Obviously, I think anybody, and this is what I was thinking, not just to come in and shoot your argument down all the way, but I feel like every Michigan fan who maybe would listen to that would be like, well, it's what we heard about Ohio State.
Sure.
And they, I mean, that was,
yes, 100%.
Maybe the best performance I've ever watched a Michigan team have, especially there. I mean, they hadn't beat Ohio State in Ohio State since 2000. It does not happen.
I was listening to a podcast before that game, and someone was like, "Yeah, my daughter, who's about to get married, hasn't even been born." I was like, "Oh my gosh."
Yes. So I just find myself very intrigued whenever it's a matchup that has never happened before, and that you don't know a ton about. I mean, as we get closer and closer, we'll keep diving more into it. And I've learned more about this. The pterodactyl. Who's the receiver they call the pterodactyl? He's like giant and super fast. He's got the long dreads.
Quentin Johnston.
Yeah, it's kid. He's a stud. He is a stud.
He's a projected number one, or not number
yes.
one, but one first round NFL draft pick. Like he's the go-to receiver.
Yeah. So I'm intrigued by that. Michigan did deal with Marvin Harrison Jr. and Emeka Ibuka over at Ohio State. Jackson Smith and Jigba didn't play that week, but so they've seen some guys, and so it's different at this stage. It's a different matchup. Like they don't, they hadn't seen them last year, or the year before. I mean, this is all brand new stuff for but for both sides. So you just wonder what it's going to look like. I mean, do you think that TCU has faced any kind of team who runs the ball like Michigan? Like, does that even exist anywhere on their schedule this year?
Kansas State comes to mind.
Okay.
Just because in the Big 12 championship game, I believe Deuce Vaughn had like 26 carries. And he had the one big run. It was like 44-yard touchdown run. And they were able to kind of seal off that edge. And he just went in untouched. Juked out a guy and almost, kind of one of those moves where it kind of breaks his ankle type of thing. But I think Kansas State comes to mind first when you think of a team like that. They're gonna pound the ball. They're gonna run that clock as much as they can. They're gonna try and win that time of possession battle. And I think that's why TCU struggled with them a little bit in the Big 12 championship game, was because, okay, we know if we give them the ball, it's gonna be a while before we see it back.
Yeah.
With how explosive TCU's offense is, they can score in 90 seconds, 3 minutes, and then you give the ball back to somebody who's gonna take their time off the clock. So, and they just wore TCU down a little bit there.
Yeah.
So I think that probably is the most comparable, because I think at one point their offensive line too was finalists for different offensive line awards. So that they would be the one that comes to mind for me.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think the very first thing you said out of the gate was kind of what I learned on my own and then heard other people say was this. It just doesn't feel like a great matchup for TCU. They've got weapons. They've got the experienced quarterback who's a gamer, but like at the core of what both teams want to be, it just seems like it could be trouble for them. And that's where the 9 or 10 point spread comes in. I mean, like that's what people think. But again, you got to, games aren't played on paper. And if you hit a couple big plays, and another thing that Michigan, this is what we were most worried about when getting ready for the Ohio State game, was like, all right, if they do get down by 10 or 14, can they come back from that? And teams that are explosive, that can score in 1 or 2 plays or really quickly, they can jump on you sometimes. You see it happen, and then it's hard for a team like Michigan to claw back into it or, really get back in front. So I'm just excited. I'm pumped that I'm going to be in the house to watch it.
Same.
And yeah, I after watching Duggan and watching the whole game against Kansas State, I'm just like, this team, they're scrappy, they're feisty. They got this. Sonny Dykes has got them playing, and you just don't know what you're kind of a wild card, and they've been up against it. I know that's another thing too. They have been up against it, so they're not going to be rattled in any situation. So, yeah, I don't know. I'm excited for the 31st. I know that.
I am too. Yeah. And I mean, and you just mentioned it, the number of comebacks they've had this year against top 25, top 15 teams, like the Oklahoma State double overtime win. Like, looking back on it, it's like, okay, how did they do that?
Yeah.
And even the Big 12 championship game, yes, they ultimately lost in overtime, but I mean, they were down 11 with like a quarter to go.
Mm-hmm.
And it was one of those things, instead of being like, oh geez, they gotta do this and this, people are just like, well, how are they gonna tie this thing up? Like,
yeah,
it just has become an expectation this year. So that's why I'm curious to see, does TCU, because I can see this going a lot of different ways. Of maybe TCU's just, they're explosive to get like a 2-touchdown lead, but then Michigan kind of just wears them down and kind of swings things the other way. Or maybe Michigan jumps out to lead and then TCU has to use some of those more opportunistic things to try and get back in it. That's where I'm just like, I'm kind of like you. I'm like, I'm just curious to see how this thing gets going. And kind of talking about opportunistic, I want to talk a little about the defenses. Because if you just look at the numbers, Michigan's defense, scoring defense, number 3 in the nation, like their defensive numbers just make them just seem so intimidating.
Yeah. They're top 2 or 3 or 4, top 5, I think, in everything pretty much that matters on defense. Whether it's passing yards or yards per play or scoring defense, like you mentioned. And that is that. I mean, to me, that was the biggest surprise and biggest, most important development for Michigan this year. I mean, I thought JJ would probably win the job. And I mean, even as a true freshman last year, when we watched Cade play, we're like, I think JJ could have pretty much done the same thing. He handed it off a lot, couple easy. Like, I don't know if the outcome would have been any different had you played a true freshman JJ McCarthy. So when he won the job this year, I'm like, they'll be fine. Quarterback be fine. Offense will be fine. They'll run the ball. I think the O-line is going to be good, maybe even better. And it was. The defense, though, when they lose a guy like Aiden Hutchinson, David Ojabo, Dax Hill, 3 first-rounders. I know David Ojabo went in the second round because he got hurt as pro day. But they lost all that production, all the sack numbers. And, oh, by the way, the coordinator goes to the pros. So I'm like, there's no way this defense is going to be as good, and they've been better. It's been incredible. It's not been like 1 or 2 guys like it was with Hutchinson and Ojabo. Like, they dominated Ohio State. They dominated against Iowa. Like, they were schemed against every single week. It's from the very beginning of the season, Jim Harbaugh called the team like the no-star or the no-name defense. And it's just a bunch of really good guys, but I don't know if there's a first or second or third rounder on the whole defense. Like, Will Johnson, the freshman corner, looks like he's going to be the real deal, but he started like a game this year. He's playing a lot, but he's not an everyday starter yet. And so it's kind of like that across the board. They've got some young guys contributing. They've got, guys from all over the place. There's no double-digit sack guys, but there's like 4 or 5 with 6 or 7. And so it just comes from all these different areas. And the defensive coordinator Jesse Minter has been incredible. He's a finalist for the Broyles Award. His halftime adjustments have been just out of control. I mean, to the point where Michigan State and Ohio State fans are convinced that Michigan is cheating profoundly at halftime because of how dominant they've been coming out of the break. And it has gotten a little bit like comical. Like, they were outscoring opponents like 100-3 for like a 5 or 6 game stretch in the second half. Like, it was pretty, you just don't see that.
No.
And yeah, they beat Ohio State 28-3 in the second half, like that on their field. Like, that doesn't happen. And so
watched a little bit of the end of that game. I was like, how does this happen?
How
in the big house? Like, that just doesn't.
Yeah,
that doesn't happen. So
the defense has been the maybe the brightest spot. And at the beginning of the year, it was the one that most people were, had the most question marks about because of so many new guys, not a new scheme, a new coordinator, keeping things very similar. That's another thing that really just kind of impressed me this year and surprised me is every time we would talk to a defensive player, they would say, I just feel so much better. It's my second year in the system. I'm like, you guys do know there's a new coordinator, right? Like, it's not exactly the same, but it's really close. And it just, it played out that way on the field. They've been lights out, especially in the second half of games. They've been incredible.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting, the comment by Harbaugh about kind of a no-name defense, or
Yeah.
it's not one person's defense, and I kind of agree with that, kind of from that outside looking in, because there isn't really anyone on that defensive list where I'm like, oh, I've heard that name a million times.
Yeah.
Aiden Hutchinson, you heard his name many
I mean,
times a week last year.
he ends up being the number 2 pick. Like, that's a guy, everybody.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So like, yeah, this year you don't know the names for Michigan, yet they're one of the best defenses in the country statistically. And like you said, the halftime adjustments, that's huge. And I think that's been one thing that I've noticed with TCU's defense is they've done a good job of making those halftime adjustments that, still not going to be perfect, but it's enough to kind of give your offense the opportunity to get some points and to flip things a little bit.
Tell me about this 3-3-5, because that seems to be like the main sticking point that Michigan fans are just like licking their chops. They're like, oh, they don't even know what's coming. There's no way they're going to stop the running game with that defense. But I mean, coaches aren't dumb. They don't just throw guys out there and get mauled over. So like, what's that going to look like? Because that is the base, but you walk guys down and you can swap some personnel. So like, how do they combat what Michigan wants to do? Because everybody knows what Michigan wants to do.
Right. They want to run the ball. And if you run 3-3-5, you're going to run up the middle every single time and get 10 yards. Like you said, the coaches are going to make adjustments to that. And it's probably going to, be probably more of a forefront with someone hanging out there. But that's one thing I'm really interested to watch. And I think that's where the scheming and that stuff is going to play a huge role, because if they're going to probably try some stunts, they're going to disguise coverages. I think they're going to do a lot of stuff like that. See if they can't force Michigan to pass a little bit, maybe get McCarthy uncomfortable, kind of force Michigan out of their usual schemes and stuff on offense. But with the run game, they've been up and down on run game defense this year. There have been some games where it was great, and there were some games, Baylor in particular comes to mind, the Big 12 championship, a couple others too, where they just struggled. Now, Baylor in particular, they used a lot of movement. They kind of would overload one side and then bring it back the other way, use a lot of misdirection, things like that. And that worked really well against TCU's defense to get them out of position. I think Baylor racked up like 250 yards or something. Like they had a day. So, I don't know if that's actually part of Michigan's MO, is a lot of misdirection, but I know that got TCU kind of out of themselves against Baylor. But they like to do some disguises and stuff to maybe load that box just a little bit while staying in that base formation.
I think Michigan fans are just so excited to watch. I mean, I'm not trying to be like, well, good luck to you, but like, it's been 13 games and they haven't really been stopped. I mean, like, there's Illinois played them pretty tough.
Yes,
I think Chase Brown may have actually. Well, Blake Corum got hurt that game too. But he didn't play the whole second half, and Donovan Edwards was also out that game or dinged up. I think that's actually the game he hurt his hand, because he's dealing with a little bit of an injury as well. But they've just every week it's been the same kind of scout. Every time I talk to somebody from the other side, they're like, well, they just want to get to JJ, make him uncomfortable and rattle. I'm like, well, he throws the ball like 12 times a game because they run for like 7 yards a pop. So like, it's hard to get him uncomfortable. He doesn't have to do a whole lot back there, but it's another reason why. Plus, you got a month. I mean, they have a month to try to figure this stuff out both ways.
Yeah, and that's kind of what really makes me curious, how many wrinkles these guys are going to put in. Because there's stuff they've been working on since probably like mid-November of like, okay, we're not going to run this against anybody until we get to a late game in the season that could get us to the championship game or CFP or whatever. They've been working on some wrinkles, and now they have a lot of time to really flesh those things out. And so I'm kind of wondering that too, because TCU's run defense has been okay. So it makes me nervous going up against team like Michigan, where that is what they do. They run the ball very well.
Yeah.
And so, but again, you have a month to prepare, so maybe you can do enough to put some disguise enough looks and pull some guys, some disguise some blitzes or things like that. I don't know, because it's kind of that same thing I was talking about with the TCU offense where everybody gets 5 yards open. Somebody's going to figure out how to stop that. Same thing for you guys. You just run the ball and somebody's going to stop it eventually, right? So yeah, I'm very curious if how that's gonna manifest itself.
My my coworker, my colleague, and I had a discussion. The uniforms. I mean, you're talking like one of the most unchanged, like classic Michigan looks versus, I don't know if TCU did a repeat all season. They have, and I like them. I like purple's one of my favorite colors. The black, it just looks great together.
Looks very slick.
Do we have a tip on what the uniform combo is going to be for this one? I can almost guarantee that Michigan's going to go in the all blues. That's what they've been rocking for all the big games.
Yeah.
Does TCU have a white out? Do they have a white head to toe look?
They do have a white head to toe look.
I would love that.
Sometimes people call it Stormtrooper.
I would love it. That's what I'm pulling for.
I haven't seen anything like on social media or anything really. Well, I say that I did see it, and now I can't remember which look it was. But there is a Stormtrooper look. That's what we call that.
Okay.
There's the Oreo, the black helmet, the white shirt, and the black pants.
Okay.
I'm
all right.
okay with that one. It's not my favorite. And of course, you got the all black, which I think is just super slick. Then you got, the purple, and there's so many combinations. So I don't know what they'll ultimately go with for the bowl game. That's always a fun thing. Like leading up to game week, it's usually like Thursday or something. They usually release it, and everybody's just so excited.
I was gonna say
socials.
We could do like a 30-40 minute like analytical dive, and then the uniform story is the one that like takes off. So I mean, people who are not into it are like, why are you guys talking about that? I'm like, well, because that article typically does better than something we spend like 4 hours on, preparing and crunching the numbers. But it is cool though, because again, they've never played before. The uniform different, like I said, you would know. I don't know if TCU wore the same thing. They're not quite Oregon, but they're in the
close.
ballpark. Yeah. They're probably the next one that has the most alternates and most changes week to week.
There might have been one or two repeats this year, but they did it. I will say their equipment team did a really nice job of mixing it up, trying not to do they never did 2 in a row ever. So, they did a real nice job mixing things up and then thinking about, what's the meaning of this game? So like the Big 12 championship, if I remember it, all black, so trying to kind of feed into whatever the meaning is behind that game. So it's always
Michigan tried, they're like, ooh, yellow socks this week. That was the big change. Like they've just started doing the all blues, like the midnight blues, and blue pants, blue tops, mostly blue helmet. And that I'll be shocked if that's not what they're wearing on the 31st. That was their Ohio State game last year at home, the Big Ten championship both years. Yeah, the playoff last year, I think. Oh no, they wore white last year because they were the lower rated team. But anyway, that's been their big game look. So my coworker Chris is like obsessed with the TCU uniforms. Like he's talked about them on like every podcast we've done, and I'm like, all right, well, okay, we'll see. So I'm intrigued. I'm interested.
No, I am too, and they always look really nice. They always look sharp. Yeah, I don't think they're quite Oregon level yet as far as the number of combos. They're close.
Yeah, I know. I think Oregon they champion themselves. I'm not repeating anything the whole season.
It's insane.
Speckles and orange, so they look like ducks, all that stuff. Anyway,
I was gonna say some of their uniforms, I'm like, they're a little weird.
Is it too early? We're 12 days out. Have you done the prediction game yet?
I haven't.
I haven't either. Mainly
because I don't think I like what my head wants me to pick.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, it's after I've like I said, after I've watched. I mean, I picked Michigan to lose against Ohio State, and I was dead wrong. I mean, that was as dominant as they've ever looked since I've been doing this job, and maybe since I've been alive. I mean, it was win by 21 in their house without Blake Corum, without Mike Morris. It was incredible. watching 12, 13 games of you again, you look up and they're up 20, and it was like a boring. I mean, a couple big runs, but like nothing crazy, and then
Right.
they just win by 30. Cool. Like, I mean, I just don't know how they lose this game. I mean, that's what I just keep coming back to that. It just feels like it's going to be chapter 14 of the 2022 season, very similar to the other 13.
Yeah, and so this is why I say my heart versus my head is my heart wants TCU to win.
Sure.
Like, and you feel for these guys because they go 12-0, and there were a couple games during that stretch that I picked against TCU. Like the Baylor game, I was like, it's a rivalry. Baylor's going to throw out all the stops, and they did, and they nearly came away with that thing. But I feel bad because they go 12-0. They lose in overtime in the Big 12 championship, and now you get a Michigan team that you're not a great matchup with. And if you lose, you don't have a Big 12 championship.
Yeah.
You don't have a CFP win. I mean, because even if TCU were to win, I don't think, and I think Georgia will beat Ohio State. I don't think they're beating Georgia because I think Georgia is kind of Michigan up a little bit. Like it's Michigan kind of on the next level as far as what their line can do and things like that. And so that's why I'm like, I feel bad because they may have this 12-0 season and then lose 2 to end it.
Yeah, man. I haven't think about that. The weirdness that was losing and not moving a spot at all, which I think was the right move.
Absolutely,
but that is pretty crazy that you could go to the playoff and end on a 2-game losing streak. I hadn't thought about it that way.
Yeah, and so that's why I'm like, my heart is like, TCU, they're gonna figure this out. Like they've managed to figure it out. I mean, Big 12 tag game, they forced overtime at least. So like they've managed to figure this out almost every single game. But my head is sitting here like, yeah, but they haven't faced a line like Michigan's. They haven't, and the one that they have, like Kansas State's closest, Kansas State wore them down in that Big 12 championship game. They just kept throwing Vaughn, and then they do little dumps over the middle or intermediate stuff to kind of keep that defense moving.
So let's remove your heart from it then. Would Michigan beat Kansas State on a neutral field?
I think so.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
I know the transitive property doesn't work in football, but like they did play them twice, right? And like, so you got a pretty good feel for Kansas State at this point.
Yes. And Kansas State was a very different team the second time TCU played them because the first time TCU played them, Adrian Martinez started, then he goes out after one drive. So Will Howard comes in, Vaughn wasn't healthy, their defense wasn't fully healthy. Like they got a different Kansas State team in that Big 12 title game. So that's the tricky part too, is, it's just, it was a different team. So I want TCU to win, but I think if TCU wins, I think it's going to have to be a lot of get a turnover here or there, get that strip sack at the 10-yard line where it either rolls into the end zone or sets you up for a quick score. You're going to have to get some stuff like that. You're going to have to get good kick and punt returns to set you up with short fields. You're going to have to get some of those opportunistic things, I think, to really set yourself up, and then do what you can scheme-wise, both offense and defense, to give yourself scoring opportunities and keep yourself in it.
Well, I don't have a score yet, but I did start booking trips to Los Angeles for the title game. So you can't wait. You can't wait till you find out. You'll pay an arm and a leg. But
I know people on the TCU end who have to, because you can't wait. You have to. And then if you don't make it, get the ticket credit, like no big deal. Hopefully you've got planned for a trip in the future. But
I do think Michigan wins. The matchup thing, I mean, it was the first thing out of your mouth, and it's the thing I've been thinking about the most. And it just, you see it in basketball sometimes, like a team you on paper, you're like, no, I don't think so. But then it just doesn't work out, and the underdog wins. The team that's maybe not supposed to, or the team, it just ends up being a lopsided win because they just don't have an answer. I feel like it could go that way for TCU, but again, I've only really watched them once, and the explosiveness and the experience from Duggan, That means a lot in a one-off, and so we'll see. But I'm excited. I'm excited that they're both in it. I don't have any. TCU was always like a random team I would use in video games because they had cool uniforms and like they're in Texas. I could recruit there. I can't say soft spot necessarily, but like I think I like TCU.
Well, so I grew up in Boise State fan,
Oh,
still follow
okay.
them. So, but kind of like Boise State, they were that team that everybody knew about. They worked their way up to be good, BCS occasional party crasher kind of thing. So yeah, it's kind of like everyone had this weird soft spot for them. But once they got to the Power Five, you can't have the soft spot anymore
Yeah,
because
yeah.
they can't act like, and even
Now
when they
they're
were
real. They're real
right,
now. Yes.
and even when they were in Conference USA, WAC, Mountain West, they could beat and compete with the big guys. But yeah, now that they're at the Power Five, you're like, oh, they can't be a soft spot team. They're
Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
So I completely understand what you're saying to where, they're that team that you've always just kind of kept an eye on and never thought you would actually have to deal with.
It was always about the uniforms on video games. So like if I wasn't Michigan, I'd go TCU, I'd go Oregon, I'd go West Virginia. I mean, that's what I did. That's
fair.
So I feel like if there's ever like a random like why do I want them to win? Oh, that's probably why. I used to play with them on Sega back in the day. So there you go. There you go. We'll see how it looks. What is the spread at this point? Is it still like 9.5 and 9, 8.5, something like that?
I think so. I didn't
I don't
look
think
at
it's
it
moved very much.
today.
Yeah, I don't think it's moved a whole lot.
I don't think it has, which that's one of those things where it's like, does that mean a whole lot? Does that mean nothing?
Yeah, I know.
And it's crazy though. Vegas knows what they're talking
They
about
don't
a
lose
lot of the
very
time.
often. Yeah, that's
No, they're very good. This was NBA draft, but we're my family is Oklahoma City Thunder fans, so we were following, who are they gonna take with their top pick this past year, and all of a sudden the odds flipped really heavily onto Chet, and we were like, that's weird. Vegas knew something,
lo and behold.
So it's just one of those things where Vegas knows weird things. But I don't know, it could mean something, it could mean nothing.
Well, we will see. Arizona, here we come, right?
Yes, hopefully weather's a little bit better.
I would expect. I'm not even bringing like long pants. It better be better. It's supposed to be like warm out there every day, right? That's what I think. I've got a buddy who lives out there, so I'm crashing with him for a few days.
Perfect.
I have to break the bank on the media hotel only for a few nights. So yeah, I'm looking really forward to the trip.
Yeah, we're flying in and out. Coming in the 31st, fly out
Wow.
the 1st. We're doing this as quick as you can, but I still enjoy it. Have a good time. But I'm excited.
I feel like I'm doing it wrong now. Maybe then I'll be there for the 26th on to the first. I mean, I'll be there the whole week as soon as the teams arrive. Yeah, but we'll see.
We had previous plans and it just kind of worked out. So it's like, well, we were gonna fly out the 31st anyways. We're just gonna change our direction.
Fair enough. Yeah, really looking forward to it. It's gonna be awesome.
Yes, same here. Me too.
Sweet. Well, what is there anything else? I mean, I feel like we hit the matchup pretty good there.
I think we did. Yeah, I think I don't have a score prediction at this point. Like I said, heart says TCU, but I think it's Michigan. But man, TCU can be opportunistic. Kind of just use those explosive plays to their advantage. They've got a chance.